Hello, everyone. We are now live. I am Mnar Adley, founder and director of MintPress News, and we are joined by Daniel McAdams. He is the director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace, someone that I have interviewed and been following his work for a very long time as he calls out the war establishment in Washington. I'm also joined by Vanessa Beeley. She's a contributor to MintPress, hasn't contributed for a while, but a frequent guest on our live streams and shows. She is based in Damascus, and she's an independent journalist that specializes in the Middle East. And so today we are going to talk about the regional implications of what's happening in Israel and Palestine as things seem to be escalating quite quickly. But before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that MintPress News has recently been completely demonetized as a channel. Not that it's like new news to people who are in the anti-war world. I think, was the Ron Paul Institute for Peace demonetized?
We were for a while, but we moved over to Rumble.
Okay, so we are partly on Rumble, but we don't do as frequent live streams and videos as you guys, so we haven't made the full move yet. But we just want to let everybody know that we have been completely demonetized as a channel, and so we'd greatly appreciate your support. We do have a pretty active Patreon membership campaign, so if you'd like to join us there, you can to support us. So all eyes have completely moved away from Ukraine now, as if that wasn't enough. Now all eyes are on Gaza, as Israel has officially dropped nearly as many bombs in Gaza in the last 6 days as the US dropped on Afghanistan in a single year. So what we are seeing is a huge win for weapons manufacturers who are literally making a killing off of the killings in Gaza. The value of shares in U.S. arms company has increased following Israel's complete siege and bombing of Gaza. Israel hasn't just bombed Gaza, though, this week. Little attention has been given to Israel's attacks on Hezbollah in South Lebanon and its bombings of Syrian territory, including the Syrian airport. This is pretty big news that really hasn't been covered within mainstream corporate media. We've covered it at MintPress. I know a lot of alternative and independent media outlets have covered it, but mainstream corporate media has not. In fact, what they've been leading with is a lot of dubious and unverified claims about beheadings, rape, and mass killings that are unverified. And in many cases, these outlets and accounts on social media have had to put out retractions. So what we have now is the US and Great Britain sending warships into the Mediterranean Sea in a show of support for Israel in case things escalate. So Israel has now targeted 3 countries, basically, Palestine or Palestinian territory, which is not necessarily a country, but Palestinian territory, Lebanon, and Syria. And US politicians like Nikki Haley, Lindsey Graham, and others, just to name a few, those are the easy ones, on the conservative side. But US politicians have made it very clear that this is not even about Hamas anymore, or Gaza, or Palestinians. This is about Iran. And so there is worry that Israel is trying to pull the US into a regional war with Iran. And we even saw Zelensky, I think he did a tweet. I don't know if you guys saw it. I didn't prepare this tweet. I'm sure we can find it. But he tweeted that he was worried that, kind of in this egotistical manner, like he was worried that people are going to forget about Ukraine and start focusing on Gaza. Gaza is obviously like the largest open air prison in the world. I just released an explainer video today on why and how Gaza became a concentration camp since 1948. 500 children have died so far. I believe it's over 200,000 people have become homeless and displaced. And now Israel's preparing for a ground invasion into Gaza. They've told people, I believe it was in the north, that you have to move to the south. And there's 1 million people in the north that need to be moved. and the entire territory of Gaza is 2 million. So there's a lot that is escalating. There is a lot of worthy versus unworthy victims narratives that are taking place, including this morning. The Times led with the unverified claim that many outlets have already retracted about the beheadings, the baby beheading story. Hamas has allegedly beheaded over 40 babies. They led with that headline, but used a picture of Palestinian children injured in Gaza. And so we're seeing a lot of propaganda. We're seeing a lot of dehumanization of Palestinians, this kind of caricature that's being painted about Palestinians as being savage, barbaric, human animals. Those are the words of Israeli politicians and military members in their justification for their genocidal attack against Gaza. And so where are we at now? What is going on in the region, and how are things escalating? So Vanessa, before I get started with you, I just wanted to play a video by Nikki Haley.
Oh my God.
And I'm sure that people have already seen this. I used it yesterday. What was that?
I said, do you have to?
Well, I think it's important that we do, because the thing is with Republicans, she's the front runner for the Republican Party, and I lost my link. I don't know where it went. So maybe we don't have to. Oh, here it is. Sorry. I found it. Hold on. I got it. So I did present this yesterday, and I think it's really, I know that she is the Republican frontrunner, and sometimes we kind of expect Republicans to say these things, right? But so oftentimes they're saying the quiet part out loud. Republicans might say this, but Democrats are openly selling Israel the weapons and acting upon what Nikki Haley is saying. So let's watch this video quick.
This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America, because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu: finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. Iran's behind it. Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
So there you have it. We have the front runner for the Republican Party calling for basically the annihilation of people in Gaza. And, sure, she's saying it's Hamas, but that's just being used to justify carpet bombing of Gaza. And sorry, it was Daniel McAdams that the first question is going for. I'm so sorry, Vanessa. But it is about the Republican establishment in the U.S. military class that are pushing these very bloodthirsty politicians forward. I mean, Nikki Haley is openly receiving funding from pro-Israel groups. I mean, she might as well be like running for the prime minister seat for Israel, not the Republican frontrunner for the U.S. Presidential seat. So talk to me a little bit about Nikki Haley and her background, and how people like her are just given kind of this platform to push these pro-war stances.
Yeah, they're America's Osama bin Ladens, right? But thankfully, I can happily correct you on one thing, and that is that she's not the front runner. In fact, she's at single digits. And that's a good thing and a bad thing in a way, because Donald Trump is by far the front runner. He's, I think, at 61% now, and the nearest Republican behind him is, I think, Ron DeSantis, whose campaign has been faltering, and he is at barely double digits, I think 10 or something the last I looked. So Nikki is being sold as a real competitor to Trump, but the fact of the matter is the Republican primaries are already settled, unless they can find a way to put Trump in jail. And even then, he could run from jail. Who knows? We could have a president in prison. But he is by far the front runner. So I say that's good news and bad news. It's good news because he's not as depraved as Nikki Haley. It's bad news because when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the region, he's obviously done some things that have put the U.S. in a very pro-combatant. I mean, you both of you know as well as I do, better than I do, in fact, the assassination of Soleimani, the recognition of Jerusalem. What else did he do? Gave the Golan Heights away. I don't know what else he did. Gave them Jared. So Trump is only marginally better or less bad than Nikki Haley. But the sentiment, you're right, is exactly that. Throughout the Republican Party, there are a few voices who aren't as rah-rah. But right now, I think they are very silent, and they're probably afraid. And I know for a fact from the old ancient days when I was on Capitol Hill, there are a lot of members who don't go along with this. And I've heard them in private saying they don't appreciate the power that the Israel lobby has on Capitol Hill. But they don't dare say anything in public. And that's, I mean, we can criticize them, but it's understandable.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about another candidate who is Tulsi Gabbard. She has come out and said that the United States must stand with Israel. And I'm going to present this. And I think she caught a lot of her own followers by surprise by tweeting this out. But what she said was, the United States must stand with Israel in the face of this terror attack by the Islamist terrorist group Hamas. This is just the latest example of the greater war being waged by both Sunni and Shia Islamist jihadists throughout the world. This should be a wake-up call to leaders everywhere that Islamist jihadists are the greatest short and long-term threat to the safety, security, and the freedom of the American people throughout the world. So I have so many problems with this tweet. First of all, I think her new favorite term is Islamist jihadist. And she's just throwing it around, which is such an Islamophobic trope that really paints, Muslims and Islam through this kind of barbaric lens of terror. But as we know, the very groups that the United States supported, like the Taliban, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, those groups are completely denounced by the majority of Muslims in the region. Their ideology comes from a politicized version of Wahhabism that was, through our history as Muslims, we understand it to be a politicized, created version of the religion by the British to push the Ottomans out in the Middle East. And so the agenda of these so-called Islamist jihadists that she's talking about is not the agenda of what Muslims are. And the second thing is, I have a problem with her saying that, and I'm sure you guys would agree, she's saying the Islamist jihadists are the greatest short and long-term threat to the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. And no mention, of course, of the U.S. military-industrial complex. It is the United States and its military empire that is occupying over like 80% of the world, and with military bases abroad, 900 military bases abroad, causing death and destruction. And so there's a lot of problems to break through here. But Vanessa, what do you think about this tweet? And tell us more about Tulsi Gabbard, because I think it caught a lot of her own supporters by surprise. She was critiqued heavily because they did see her for such a long time as a voice for the anti-war movement.
Yeah, I find this statement that Islamist jihadism, that's a mouthful anyway. And as you say, it completely misrepresents the majority of Islam globally. But I think what's extraordinary, she says it's the greatest long and short-term threat to the United States, and yet they're happy to fund, arm, equip, and support those same organizations to destroy Syria, to destroy Afghanistan, to destroy Iraq, to destroy Libya. So this is complete hypocrisy. And the fact for me that I think it was in the last 6 months or so that Tulsi Gabbard, or it might even have been last year, that Tulsi Gabbard was with the military in Africa, in the Sahel, allegedly fighting Al-Qaeda. And of course, the US again is promoting and fostering Al-Qaeda in Africa, in Central Africa, to push back against Chinese and Russian influence. in the continent, right? So, it's very difficult. And I also saw the tweet that Robert F. Kennedy put out, which was just an extraordinary call to arms for the United States to basically provide all the weapons that Israel needed, to provide all of the political support, any kind of support that Israel needed. Basically, America should be providing it. So across the board, we're seeing bipartisan support now for Israel and for this war. And I think what I wanted to point out, it's been framed as the war of Israel against Hamas. Now, I immediately picked up and tried to warn people about this, even people on our own side that were kind of picking it up and running with it. And now what's happening, Hamas has become Palestine. Palestine has become the Arabs. And the Arabs are now all terrorists because they're associated with Hamas. And at some point, I also want to come on to the kind of the idea that a lot of people in our independent media community are putting out, that Hamas is Israeli controlled, that it's a construct that is compromised, etc. I'm actually not disagreeing with that, but it's way more complex than it's being presented as by quite a few independent media outlets right now.
Well, and I think the history of Hamas is very complicated as well. And the Hamas that we know of today is not the same Hamas that existed when that group formed. The same thing with the Taliban. The Taliban that we know today is not the same Taliban that we saw in its beginning stages. Organizations and movements evolve, and there are, I believe, over 20, if not, I think that's a very small number, but over 20 different resistance groups in Gaza, and yet the media is always shoving the word Hamas down everybody's throat, and it's just used as a, this caricature to paint the people of Gaza as barbaric and savage, and I'm actually thinking of doing a video about the dehumanization of the Muslim man. You see these images of these men and these fathers in Gaza who are holding their dead babies who have just died, and nobody is talking about them. We always hear about, the women and the children, but we never really hear about the men, the fathers, the brothers, the sons. And again, it's all within the same name of ideology of pushing that kind of Islamophobic trope to paint, Muslim men as barbaric, as oppressing of women as being, victims of this, toxic masculinity, whatever it is within the culture. It's pretty disturbing stuff. But now things are escalating within the region. We heard Nikki Haley. We're hearing other politicians say that that this is Iran's fault. And so, Vanessa, what are you, before we actually even get into Iran, I want to hear more about Israel's attack on Syria's airport, and then we can go into the kind of the regional perspective of drawing Iran into this broader war, because the attack on Syria is Israel's way of attacking Iran.
Yeah, to a degree.
In some way.
Also, it has a number of reasons behind it. One is that, of course, they wanted to distract away from the very real extermination of Palestinians, the ethnic cleansing that has continued since 1948 until now, that they were committing atrocities against Palestinians in Gaza on a minute-by-minute basis. So they wanted to distract away from that. The second thing, of course, is that they see Syria really as the greatest threat to them in the region, actually almost more than Iran, because Syria is neighboring Israel, of course. Syria, one of the reasons that the war was waged against Syria for the last 13 years is because it would not relinquish its support for the Palestinian cause, and it wouldn't relinquish its allies, which include Russia and Iran and Hezbollah. And so the attack on the airport, which, by the way, is certainly not the first one this year. I think it's around 10 attacks now on what are basically main arterial civilian airports inside Syria. In Aleppo, of course, they've attacked it multiple times. including after the earthquake. So they impeded humanitarian relief to the victims of the earthquake in Aleppo and in Syria that is under the protection of the Syrian government. And so an attack on the two main civilian airports is a clear sign that actually they're worried about Syria's involvement in this resistance operation. And I think what is very interesting for me is that the blame is being laid at Iran's door. But it's clear for me, speaking to people here, speaking to Palestinians living in diaspora here, speaking to military and so on, that this operation has been planned for years, right? And we've seen the normalization of relations with Iran, Hezbollah, and particularly Syria with Hamas in the last 18 months. And that's a point I wanted to make. Hamas has been responsible as Muslim Brotherhood for much of the destabilization in Syria since 2011. It worked and collaborated with Al-Qaeda in Syria, Nusra Front. But in the last 18 months, President Assad has normalized relations with Hamas on the basis that they wanted to have a unified resistance operation, right? And so to say that Iran is involved in this is perfectly obvious to me. Iran has never hidden the fact that it supports the Palestinian cause any more than Syria has, any more than Hezbollah has, any more than Yemen has, any more than factions in Iraq have. So, you know, I'm not quite sure why this is now seen as some kind of hidden clandestine involvement by Iran in this operation. No, it's been quite clear that Iran has been planning this operation. And what we're seeing right now is the operation being led by the Palestinian resistance. And until the Palestinian resistance actually put their hand up and say, okay, we need help right now, the resistance axis is going to stay back. It's giving logistic support, technological support, weapon support, and it's been giving that for years in preparation. But right now, it's kind of sitting back and waiting to see what happens, but it's ready to go in. And Syria, President Assad has kind of said for years, you know, we're not going to react to Israel until we're ready to react to Israel. He gave a very clear message. And Israel has been provoking and probing and prodding Israel to try and push it into responding before it's ready, or before the resistance axis is ready.
And do we know how many times Israel has bombed Gaza? Or not Gaza, I'm sorry, Syria, excuse me, Syria. Israel has bombed Syria, excuse me.
This year, I think it's got to be more than 30 times now.
Wow.
And the majority civilian areas, residential areas, civil aviation. I mean, both Damascus and Aleppo airport are closed down. But if the air defense had not intercepted the majority of missiles, there could have been another massacre, because Damascus airport at that time in the afternoon was packed with people leaving for various places, and people, you know, relatives waving them goodbye and so on. There's a video that's been released, and the number of people that were screaming and watching the missiles land. But thank God for the air defense that brought down probably 90% of the missiles, and therefore the damage was only to, I think, to logistics and to the runways.
It's quite incredible what Syria has gone through since the United States and Israel and much of the, European countries and so-called friends of Syria access, and the Gulf states armed rebels there to turn the country upside down and to foment a sectarian divide. Now the U.S. is still occupying a third of Syria. It's stealing its oil. Israel is, also stealing Syria's oil. They're working with the Kurds. They're arming the SDF. There's just like Syria has been through so much, and they're still being bombed by Israel. Still. And you just don't hear it within mainstream corporate media. And you have people like Tulsi Gabbard, who for a while, she pretended to care for the people in Syria. She even went to Syria. And now she's kind of become the the new Nikki Haley of that movement.
Yeah.
So I want to go to you next, Daniel, but I want to play this video by Ursula von der Leyen, who has just arrived in Israel.
Oh,
And
God.
we laugh, but this person is so powerful, and
I know.
she's in Israel. She just landed.
The gynecologist.
What was that?
She's the gynecologist she's referred to as. That's her profession.
Oh. Well, she's
Tell
the
us
president
more.
she's the president of the EU Commission, and she has given unequivocal support to Israel. She's arrived now at the scenes of the Hamas attacks. Again, we still have a lot of unverified claims coming out of this music festival. And I just want to play this video here of her arriving. So obviously she's just shaking hands. It's nothing really that great, but she arrived in Israel in the last 24 hours. She's in Kfar Azza. This is her other tweet here. One of the epicenters of the atrocities committed by Hamas last weekend. The horror of what happened here is unspeakable. We mourn with the families of the victims. And I think a lot of people are wondering, would somebody like her go to Gaza right now?
No.
And to see, we have unverified reports of what happened there, right? Of what happened on the Israeli side. And we have in real time images and videos of Israel bombing Gaza, targeting entire, residential neighborhoods. They've taken entire families. They've killed them. They've massacred babies. We're seeing actual images of these things. 500 children have now died. And we actually have evidence of that. That's the evidence that we have versus a lot of these unverified reports. So somebody like her is, and a lot of politicians within the EU, the British establishment, the US establishment, purport to care about human rights and democracy. And they use those very fancy terms every time they speak. And yet if you look at her page, she has yet to even comment about the atrocities that Israel has committed in Gaza. And so we're also seeing now the British sending their warships into the Mediterranean Sea and US warships entering the Mediterranean Sea. What do you make of this escalation, Daniel?
Well, the thing about von der Leyen that's interesting is she runs around lecturing about democracy, but she was never elected to anything. She's been appointed the commissioner of the European Commissioner, so it's a bit of irony there. The other bit of irony is, if I'm sure you both remember this, is during that war so long ago in Iraq or in Ukraine and Russia, she tweeted out when Russia was hitting some of Ukraine's power plants that to deny people, the civilian population, food, water, and electricity is a war crime. And then as soon as the Israeli defense minister said, we're going to do exactly that, she tweeted out, we support Israel. So the hypocrisy is there for everyone to see. But in terms of and actually, if you don't mind, if I can just touch on Tulsi for a second.
Yeah, please.
I think Tulsi just hates Muslims. I think that's just a fact. She's always had that in her. She's always sort of been that way. And I think that's part of a larger picture in the United States, which is kind of a reversion to tribalism. That's why you saw in Ukraine and Russia, there was some mix-up. There were some conservatives who were coming over to our anti-war side. People weren't too sure. But when it comes to the Middle East, there's this kind of bizarre reversion to tribalism. You have American fundamentalists, Christian Zionists, who reflexively, they don't have to think. It's on autopilot. You have a lot of even liberal Jewish Zionists who revert back to this tribalism. So I think a lot of it is a function of the fact that most Americans don't know very much about the rest of the world. If more people were like Vanessa and had traveled around and understood what it's really like out there, outside of our shores, they would probably understand better. So it's shorthand. The media tells them how to think. Oh, you're a Christian, you have to support Israel. If you don't, you support Hamas. So there's no question of understanding, as we do, all of us in the anti-war movement, the distinction between combatants and non-combatants, civilians and military, this and that. No, it's the reversion to this kind of tribal instinct. It's it's an anti-intellectual shorthand for the black hats and white hats, and that's why we have that's exploited, I think, by the military-industrial complex and by the deep state and by other powers who have their own interests and their own agenda. So I just wanted to touch on some of that.
And what about the U.S. escalation in the Mediterranean Sea? What do you make of this?
Yeah, here's another thing, though. This is very important, that the U.S. is out of weapons, right? And so are the Europeans. I think the UK, it was back 6 months ago, they said, we've got 14 tanks. So, all right, let's do it. Sail Britannia. I mean, they're going to, is there going to be a false flag and one of the carriers get taken out? Or is Hezbollah going to take out a carrier? They probably could. Is that something that Lindsey Graham would be thrilled about? Yes, he would love to see that happen, because you got to crack a few eggs. But the fact of the matter is, the Americans have literally dropped $130 billion and most of our military industrial capacity into Project Ukraine. We even take weapons out of depots we had in Israel, saying, hey, guys, you're not going to need these. Don't worry. Don't sweat it. We got some stuff in Ukraine to deal with. So you have rhetoric versus reality, and that's a big issue. Yes, the U.S. can still bring enormous military might to the theater, but when they tell Israel, we'll give you whatever you want, they should look over to Zelensky, because they promised him whatever you want, whatever you need, as long as you need it. And now they're saying, Vladimir who? So the capacity is not necessarily, the neocons are writing checks that the Pentagon can't cash.
And so when we look at some of the think tanks that are escalating and pushing these narratives of war, Daniel, we've seen this push. Is that an echo from me? I don't know how to get rid of it, but we've seen this push for war with Iran for a very long time. I think I've even interviewed you about this many years ago, for decades and decades. But it seems like both parties do want a war with Iran. Democrats tend to not talk about it in that way as aggressively as Republicans, but they do support Iran being sanctioned. They do support, they do talk about Iran as being a financier of terrorism in the region. So they still do push kind of those anti-Iran rhetoric. They were supporting a lot of the protests. They were escalating a lot of the protests in Iran for the hijab mandate. They do push a lot of those narratives that would support regime change in Iran. So talk to me about this anti-Iran sentiment, and where do you see it going from both parties?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to realize is that America is a deeply corrupt society. And you don't necessarily see it on the surface, but America is driven by war. War drives the American economy. If you look at the donors to the think tanks that you're talking about, they're all weapons manufacturers. It's an obscene cycle where you get these massive contracts that are stolen from American workers. The middle class and the working class are hit disproportionately hard, of course, because of inflation, which always hits the poor harder than the rich. So they are taxed, and the currency is devalued to fund this massive, massive war machine that profits politicians because they get kickbacks. It profits former politicians because they have sinecures in these think tanks that are very, very well paid. And round you go. You have the think tanks calling for war, putting out very serious papers from very serious people. But America needs an enemy. We thought for a while that, okay, this Ukraine stuff is not going very well. Don't worry, we can pivot to Taiwan. We'll keep the war machine going. But lo and behold, the Middle East blows up again. Everyone is nostalgic. The war on terror is back. They're going to dust off George W. Bush, and give him a couple of medals. I mean, the only good thing literally in the Obama presidency was the Iran deal, I think. There were a couple of minor good things, but that's the one real achievement. Just like the only decent thing in the Biden presidency is this deal that was made a few weeks ago, this prisoner exchange, which gave them a little bit of their own money back, gave Iran a little bit of its own money back. And look what the know-nothings in America and the neocons who drive opinion saying, oh, Joe Biden is writing a check to Iran for $6 billion, and look, Hamas blew stuff up with that money.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
And not to pick on Nikki Haley, but I was going to show this too, but I don't think we're going to have time. But she tweeted in the last couple of days that she is part of a deal trying to convince the U.S. to not freeze as much of those assets and to give that money instead to Israel. Could anyone have guessed that? Take Iran's money and give it to Israel. That's what she's tweeting, and she's very proud of what she's saying.
She had a thought.
I want to share this video of Ursula. I know we're picking on a couple of people here, but I think it's important. I did tweet this out. It was 1 year ago, like yesterday, that she tweeted this. And it's of her talking about how Russia is cutting off electricity and water and how all of this is a war crime. And yet she's not saying that about Israel.
War crimes, targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure with a clear aim, cut off men, women, children, of water, electricity, and heating. With the winter coming, these are acts of pure terror, and we have to call it as such. This is a moment to stay the course, and we will back Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Oops.
And we will protect Europeans from the other war that Putin is waging. This is his war on our energy. I know that Europeans are concerned about inflation, concerned about energy bills, concerned about the winter.
I'm not going to obviously play the whole video. I'll just play up to 1 minute.
Is European solidarity and European unity. And in this spirit, the Commission agreed yesterday on a strong...
So this is the same person that a few months ago, she went viral because she said that Israel let the desert bloom. And which is such a racist remark in that, that Israel is kind of like this beacon of light in the Middle East versus all of the other Arab and Muslim countries. So let me just undo this. And so this is quite hypocritical because these are the kinds of things that Israel is doing. And yet we saw Israel supporting terror groups in Syria. And Israel is also targeting groups like Hezbollah who have broken the siege to provide Lebanon with gas and fuel and food from Iran. And so talk to me, Vanessa, about this hypocrisy.
Well, it's what I call the whole cartel of the UK, the US, and Israel, because, of course, Biden, the first thing he did, I think, before even his inauguration, was to bomb the Al-Bukamal crossing, which is the main lifeline for Syria for humanitarian relief and so on, to come in from Iran through Iraq and into Syria. And of course, America has made it very clear that they want to take control of Al-Bukamal and basically cut off that entire eastern border for Syria. And Israel has also been involved in the recent so-called movement for federalization in the south. It's backing the separatists within the Druze movement. It has done historically. There are Druze in Israel and in Lebanon. The largest or the majority are in Syria. And a very small minority of that Druze community is being weaponized by Israel to basically try and annex further Syrian territory, right, and have it under their control by proxy, just as the US has the northeast of Syria under their control by the Kurdish proxy militia. And, when von der Leyen talks about this being an act of terror, Well, the US and the Israeli cartel are, of course, depriving Syrians, and have been for the last 12 years, of water, electricity, fuel, food. The Caesar Act, which was brought in under the Trump administration, ensured that countries that want to come to the assistance of Syria are unable to do so because they will be caught up in the collective punishment for resisting the US, UK, Israeli agenda in Syria and the region. So, the hypocrisy right now is off the scale. While von der Leyen is calling out Russia for committing so-called war crimes or crimes of terror in Ukraine, they're committing those same crimes. Their proxies in Ukraine are committing those crimes against the people of Donbass. And of course, right now, the Zionist entity is about to commit that crime, and it has been committing that crime for the last 75 years, or the last 17 years, against Gaza, which is an open-air concentration camp where Israel controls everything: electricity, internet, water, fishing rights, food supply. Nothing enters Gaza without Israel's say-so, and they can cut off that supply at any time. And another point that I wanted to make, there was an instruction put out to prison officers in the largest prisons within the occupied territories to carry out collective punishment of prisoners. So what is Israel doing? It's not engaging with the resistance military on the ground. It's basically doing exactly what Al-Qaeda did in Syria. It's attacking the vulnerable. It's attacking women and children in Gaza where they have no escape. It's attacking prisoners where they've got nowhere to go. They can't escape. They're killing prisoners that have only just been released. They're attacking basically children and unarmed civilians. They're not engaging with the resistance military. And that's another point that I want to make about the ground invasion claims. When I was in Gaza during the aggression in 2012, every single night they sent us text messages saying, we're going to carry out a ground invasion. The first 2 nights, people were kind of nervous and a bit traumatized by it because there's bombs coming in from air, sea, land, helicopter, drone, right? And we were expecting a ground invasion. By the 3rd night, people started mocking them because it never happened. Why? Because the Zionist army, I almost said something rude out, but they're cowards on the ground. When they entered Shujaiya in Gaza in 2014, they ran away when they were confronted with armed resistance. And the resistance now is not what it was in 2006. It's not what it was in 2014 or even in 2021, right? It's an organized army. And I know for a fact from intelligence here that if they enter Gaza with a ground invasion, they're going to be met with proportionate force. Wow. And so I think there's a lot of psychological warfare going on right now from the Zionist entity. And people in Gaza are quite used to this. In 2012, they told us we all had to evacuate. Nobody did it, right? So, the Zionists are very good at presenting themselves as this invincible entity. And I think what we're seeing now is them being exposed as a paper tiger. The Iron Dome is not working. The ground forces were completely overwhelmed. Their intelligence and surveillance was also completely, let's say, outmaneuvered, right? And Scott Ritter has written a very, very good in-depth article about this. And I kind of concur with his conclusions. I think Israel is being exposed, just as the US is being exposed in Ukraine, as not being the super force that they have told people they are for decades through their Mockingbird media, their intelligence and security agencies, their think tanks, their UN agencies that are also captive to their agendas. So I think we're in a very precarious, but a very transformational time.
As we wrap up, I just want to play one last video from President Zelensky on Ukraine. Well, it's just like they're too good to be true, I think. And when we watch them, we laugh, right? Like because we can just we can read between the lines. We know what the agenda is. We know who these people are, how they're getting paid, and it's as if they're all given a script. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who believe what they have to say. So, just going off of the back of what you actually just talked about, this is something that can piggyback on what you just said, Vanessa, is, President Zelensky tweeted, I think this was just like a couple days ago, we have data very clearly proving that Russia is interested in inciting war in the Middle East, so that a new source of pain and suffering would erode global unity and exacerbate cleavages and controversies, helping Russia in destroying freedom in Europe. We can see Russian propagandists gloating. We can see Moscow's Iranian friends openly extending a helping hand to those who attacked Israel. All of this represents a much greater threat than the world is currently aware of. The world wars of the past were triggered by local aggressions. We know how to counter this threat. We have already prepared for necessary steps, and our primary goal is to protect the need for maximum global unity. And by the way, when I play videos, I actually can't hear them, so I don't know if he's speaking in English or not. So I'm just going to play this really quick.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, України. Сьогодні був дуже
Is it in English?
Різні
No, but there's subtitles.
Okay.
ті, що стосуються нової міжнародної ситуації. Ми нараду з керівниками нашої розвідки та зовнішньої розвідки, з нашими дипломатами щодо ситуації в Ізраїлі та навколо нього та щодо загальної ситуації на Близькому Сході. Це має принципове значення для нас, не лише для України, а для всієї Європи. За наявною інформацією дуже чіткою, Росія зацікавлена в розпаленні війни на Близькому Сході, щоб нове джерело болю та страждань послабило світову єдність, додало розколів та допомогло Росії знищувати свободу в Європі. Ми бачимо, як російські пропагандисти зловтішаються, бачимо, як іранські друзі Москві цілком відверто підставляють плече тим, хто напав на Ізраїль, і все це значно більше загроза, ніж зараз світ сприймає. Світові війни минулого розгорались.
So this is another example of a individual who has enjoyed billions of dollars worth of U.S. Military aid being pumped into his country. And while all of the people that I have just posted their clips, not a single one of them has condemned Israel's carpet bombing of Gaza that has, flattened entire residential neighborhoods, where Israel has cut off electricity, cut off water, destroyed the power plants, the water treatment facilities that have left 500 children dead. And so it's almost like a cry for attention by Zelensky as the world's eyes turn to Gaza right now. I mean, that's how I see it. But if you can, Daniel, leave us with some parting words as we wrap up about where you see the crisis in Ukraine heading and the future of, Zelensky and this war.
Well, he's like an aging actor that doesn't know when to get off the stage. He's desperate. And he probably knows he's about to get Gaddafi'd. Unfortunately, that's what happens to all of Americans' allies once they're of no use, But I would just, if I could just say one thing to, the supporters of Israel in America, which is that you're doing Israel no favors. America is like the worst friend to Israel in the world, because, Israel's he's a drunk in a bar, and he needs someone to put his arm around him and say, okay, you've had enough. It's time to go home. America is the guy that's saying, hey, let's do tequila shots, come on. Let's keep going. So even if you are passionately attached to that country, which I think as an American, I'm passionately attached to no country than my own, you certainly aren't doing them any favors by supporting the opening of a broad war against them, in which many people will die, including Israeli civilians. So I just wish more Americans can see that, but we're so insulated from war that it's all just a video game. But there are real consequences, as Vanessa, unfortunately, throughout her career, these many years, sees face to face. And better than anyone else, the horrors of war.
Vanessa, did you want to leave us with any parting words before we end the live stream?
I think all I really wanted to say is, please, addressing people in the UK, the EU, and the US that are being misled by the propaganda, I can categorically say that people in Syria, people in Iraq, people in Yemen, people in Palestine do not want bloodshed. They are not vengeful people. I've seen people in Gaza who've lost their children, that have lost their fathers, their mothers, their sisters, their brothers. And all they have is an incomprehension of the inhumanity of the force that has done this. But the thing is that the media, until 2 weeks ago, was telling us that Netanyahu's far-right extremist government was going to provoke this kind of eruption. Now suddenly, no one understands it. You know, you're being played. We're all being played, right? And I think that's the most important thing. Palestinians are humans, Syrians are humans, and they don't want war. But if you push them to the extent where they face either a trickle genocide or resistance, they're eventually going to pick resistance.
That's a very good point. The more violence against these people, in the end, they're going to react possibly in a violent way. And people will say, you know, why don't they protest peacefully? Well, we just to end with this, just to end with this about Gaza, a very simple example: 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza joined the Great March of Return, unarmed. All they did was march to the Gaza border and ask for the siege to be lifted so that food, medicine, and supplies would enter. That was literally like the only thing that they were demanding. And Israeli snipers gunned people down. And Israeli soldiers even came out through breaking the silence and said they were ordered to shoot at the ankles and legs of the men protesters, so that they could still be alive, but as amputees and as handicapped. Sadistic, absolutely sadistic. And they have endured so much pain and violence, and yet they continue to fight back and resist. And so the more violence they've endured, in the end, a violent reaction is going to be inevitable. And in fact, it is Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in the West Bank. It's their right under international law to resist, even through an armed struggle. So that is all for today's live stream. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'd appreciate all of the support. And, you know, MintPress is a small independent media outlet. And, you know, as I mentioned before, we'd greatly appreciate people joining our Patreon campaign and becoming a member, as we recently had our YouTube channel completely demonetized. So we will continue to break through the fog of war, to break through the soft propaganda, the dehumanization, and counter the war narrative. And please make sure to follow Vanessa Beeley and Daniel McAdams. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.